life. It's a journey where we all, at some point, must face challenges. These challenges come in many forms: losses, painful failures, and even mistakes that seem too big to forgive. In moments like these, we often find ourselves asking, "Why me? Why is life so unfair?" We resist, we get angry, sometimes we break down completely. But have you ever noticed something? Every time we resist like that, it feels as if our hearts get a little smaller. There's a story I'd like to share with you, a story about a handful of salt and a river. Imagine this: you take a handful of salt and drop it into a small bowl of water. What happens? The water becomes so salty that you can't drink it. But now, take that same handful of salt and drop it into a large flowing river. What happens then? The water in the river remains fresh, pure, and drinkable. So, what's the difference? The amount of salt didn't change, but the size of the container did. Life is no different. Hardships, failures, and mistakes will always be there. They are the salt of life. But whether those hardships overwhelm you or simply flow past you depends on the size of your heart. If your heart is small, like a little bowl, then just one handful of salt, one setback, one insult, and mistake can make you feel overwhelmed. But if your heart is vast, like a river, then even with all the salt life throws your way, you will remain steady, clear, and strong. Today, I want to talk to you about endurance and patience. Not the kind of endurance where you grit your teeth and suppress your emotions. Not the kind of patience where you quietly suffer in silence. No, I'm talking about the art of expanding your heart. Because when you learn to expand your heart, you don't have to endure life. You simply embrace it. So stay with me. Listen closely, and maybe, just maybe, you'll see yourself in this story. Acceptance isn't the end, it's the beginning. None of us are ever truly ready to receive bad news, especially when it comes from a doctor. "You have cancer." Those were the words Mrs. Mary, a 52-year-old woman, heard during her routine health checkup. At first, she couldn't believe her ears. Her heart pounded in her chest. Fear, confusion, and anger swirled together in her mind like a storm. "No, this can't be true. I didn't do anything wrong. Why me?" she cried out, tears streaming down her face. For days after, she wandered through her house, lost in her thoughts. Her mind was flooded with the same question, over and over again. Why me? Why now? But no one could give her an answer. She stopped eating, she stopped talking to her family. She didn't want to step outside. Her refusal to face reality trapped her in the darkness of her own mind. But one day something changed. She was sitting on her porch, gazing out at the world around her. As she watched the yellow autumn leaves fall from the trees, a thought suddenly came to her. Leaves don't fall because they're unlucky. They fall because it's their time to fall. It's simply nature's way. In that moment, she found clarity. She realized that no amount of tears, anger, or self-pity would change the fact that she had cancer. No one could undo it. No one could reverse it. But there was something she could change: how she responded to it. And so, she decided to face it head-on. She met with her doctor to create a treatment plan. She started taking better care of her body, eating healthier, exercising lightly, and listening to the signals her body was sending her. Instead of seeing cancer as the enemy, she saw it as a difficult companion, one she didn't like but had to understand. And something incredible happened. Her doctors were amazed. Her condition began to improve. Her cancer cells, which had once spread aggressively, began to slow down. Why? According to medical science, when we accept reality instead of fighting it, our body experiences less stress. And when stress decreases, our body's natural self-healing process is activated. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means having the courage to face the truth. But let me ask you this, how many of us are brave enough to accept reality? Too often we confuse acceptance with surrender. We think that if we accept something, it means we're weak, that we're giving up. But the truth is the exact opposite. Acceptance is the first step to healing. Only when you stop fighting reality can you see things clearly enough to find a way forward. Remember this, facing the truth will never make you weaker. It will make you stronger. If you keep running from the truth, you're only trapping yourself in an endless cycle of pain. Acceptance isn't the end. It's the beginning. Acceptance means choosing to move forward instead of collapsing under the weight of things you cannot change. Failure teaches us humility. Mistakes teach us compassion. Have you ever heard someone proudly declare, "I never accept failure"? At first it sounds bold, strong, unshakable. But think about it. Has anyone ever gone through life without experiencing failure? If someone claims they've never failed, maybe it's because they've never dared to try something truly challenging. Let me share a story about a man named James. James was a young entrepreneur, and among his friends he was known as the man with the golden touch. Every investment he made was a success. Every deal he signed turned to gold. His friends admired him. Some even envied him. Fueled by his streak of success, James boldly declared to his friends, "I never fail, only weak people accept failure." But life has a way of humbling us. One day, James decided to go all in on a major business venture. He invested every penny he had into a deal he believed was foolproof. But life is unpredictable. Due to unexpected changes in the market, the entire deal collapsed. In a moment, James went from being a winner to being completely broke. And when that happens, what do you think goes through a person's mind? James locked himself in his room. He avoided his family, his friends, and the world. His thoughts became his prison. How could I be so stupid? How could I make such a ridiculous mistake? But here's the thing, his failure wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that he couldn't accept himself for making a mistake. He hated himself for it, and that hatred consumed him. But one day, a close friend came to visit. The friend sat with him, listened to his story, and then said something that would change his life. "You're not the only one who's failed, James. No one succeeds forever. You can't change the past, but you can change yourself." Those words woke him up. He realized that failure isn't the end of the road. Failure is simply a stop on the journey toward growth. So he stood up. He started over. But this time, he was different. He was wiser, more cautious, and more humble. The most important change? He no longer feared failure. He knew that every failure, every mistake, was a chance to learn and grow. But here's something you may not have considered. This lesson doesn't just apply to business or careers. It applies to every part of our lives. Think about the relationships in your life. Have you ever hurt someone you care about, asked for their forgiveness, and received it, but still, you couldn't forgive yourself? Have you ever caught yourself replaying the same scene in your mind over and over again, saying, "Why did I say that? Why did I act that way?" You've probably felt that weight before. It's the weight of not accepting your own mistakes. But let me tell you something important. Everyone makes mistakes. Perfection does not exist. Those who demand perfection from themselves will only end up exhausted, broken, and disappointed. Accepting your mistakes doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're brave enough to see the truth and kind enough to forgive yourself. So the next time you make a mistake, tell yourself this: I'm not perfect, but I'm learning. Because if you keep punishing yourself for every mistake, you'll never see the bigger picture. you'll never see all the good that still exists within you. Forgiving yourself is one of the most essential forms of self-acceptance. Failure teaches us humility. Mistakes teach us compassion. If you can accept your failures and mistakes, the world will also accept you. So stop blaming yourself. Stop judging yourself so harshly. Remind yourself every day, I am not perfect, and that's okay. I am learning. Expand the capacity of the heart. Have you heard the story of the handful of salt in the river? Imagine this. You take a handful of salt and drop it into a small bowl of water. What happens? The water becomes unbearably salty, so bitter you can't drink it. Now, take that same handful of salt and drop it into a large flowing river. What happens then? The river stays fresh, clear, and drinkable. So, what's the difference? It's not the salt that changed, it's the size of the container. People are the same way. Hardships, mistakes, and struggles, these are the handfuls of salt that life throws at us. If our hearts are small, like the little bowl, then even a small setback can make us bitter, angry, and overwhelmed. But if our hearts are as wide as a river, the mistakes of others, the failures of life, and the difficulties we face will no longer feel so heavy. Let me share a story with you. There was a father who had 3 children. His youngest son was always getting into trouble, fighting with classmates, getting into arguments with teachers, constantly being called to the principal's office. It seemed like every week the father had to apologize on behalf of his son. He tried to be patient. He tried to stay calm. But one day, he'd had enough. In a moment of frustration, he shouted at his son, "You're a disgrace. From now on, you're on your own. Take responsibility for your own life." And with that, he decided to kick his youngest son out of the house. The father believed he was doing the right thing. I have to protect my other 2 children, he thought. I have to maintain the honor of our family name. But as time passed, something didn't feel right. Every time he heard someone mention his youngest son, his heart grew heavy. There was a quiet ache that wouldn't go away. One day, he ran into an old friend, and during their conversation, the friend said something that would change the father's life forever. If your love was as big as a river, why couldn't it hold one handful of salt, your own son? Those words struck him like lightning. He realized that he hadn't failed because his son made mistakes. He failed because his heart was too small to hold those mistakes. In that moment, he understood something profound. If our hearts are small, every mistake made by others will seem huge. But if our hearts are wide like a river, those mistakes will be no more than grains of sand flowing downstream. Endurance is not about suppressing pain. It's about expanding the capacity of your heart to hold it. Too often, people think that endurance means silently suffering through hardships, biting their tongues and hiding their pain. But they're wrong. True endurance is an art of the heart. It's the ability to face life with compassion, patience, and understanding. When you can look at someone who has hurt you and still see them with kindness, you are no longer enduring them, you're embracing them. Just like the river. No matter how many handfuls of salt are poured into it, the water stays clear and drinkable. This is what it means to have a heart as vast as a river. Don't be like the small bowl of water where every little mistake makes you bitter and angry. Be the river. Train yourself to hold more. Practice compassion. Learn to accept the imperfections in life, in others, and in yourself. Because the truth is, all of us have made mistakes. And if we're honest, every single one of us has at some point been the handful of salt in someone else's life. By now you may have realized something important. Endurance is not weakness, and patience is not cowardice. True endurance is the ability to expand your heart, to hold the challenges that life throws your way. Just like a river can hold thousands of handfuls of salt without losing its freshness, your heart can grow bigger, wider, and more capable of embracing life's hardships. Life will never stop tossing handfuls of salt your way. It might come in the form of a setback, a failure, a mistake made by someone else, or even a mistake you make yourself. You can't stop those handfuls of salt from coming. But here's the good news: you do get to choose how you receive them. Will your heart be a small bowl of water where every bit of salt makes it bitter? Or will your heart be a vast river where even the harshest storms eventually settle into stillness? Choose to be the river. If you do, life becomes lighter. When you face failure, don't be so hard on yourself. See it as a lesson, not a reflection of your worth. When others make mistakes, resist the urge to judge them harshly. Open your heart with compassion, because at some point, you too have been a handful of salt in someone else's life. And when life hits you with unexpected hardship, don't fight it. Don't run from it. Accept it, and then look for the path forward. A handful of salt will never make a great river taste salty. A single mistake will never ruin a boundless heart. Remember, you always have a choice. Your heart may feel small right now, but if you train it every day, it can grow larger than any river, stronger than any storm. So ask yourself, what will you be? A small bowl of water or a vast flowing river?